it's the next to last session for the day, and Brent Alexander is here to talk to us about 10 psychology principles every UX UI designer, and probably most of the rest of us should know. The 10 principles are, oh wait, I don't want to give that away, do I? Brent's been building websites for quite a while. He's built over 100 sites, and he's been doing a lot with UX and UI, and he likes problem-solving thinking and cognitive psychology and behavioral economics. He loves digging into the why behind design and development and figuring that out. So here's Brent.
All right, welcome to General Psych 101. My name is Brent Alexander. Please take out your blue books and the exam will begin in 2 minutes. Just kidding. You're in the right place. This is WordCamp. This is not college. Should have seen your face over there. Getting flashbacks to your college days, right? Well, while this isn't a college classroom, I do want to share with you some principles from cognitive psychology and how they relate to UI UX design. And even how they relate to WordPress. After all, this is WordCamp. And there won't be any exam at the end, so don't worry about that. So I have some assumptions. I'm going to assume you already know what UI UX design is, user interface, user experience design. If you don't, you have a magic Google machine on your phone, pull it out, look it up. There's all kinds of information already on the web about that. I'm also going to assume you know and use WordPress. This is WordCamp. I'm going to assume you have a general understanding of psychology. It's the study of human mind and its behavior. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a PhD in psychology. You don't even have to have any type of degree in it. I don't have one, but you know what the word psychology is, and you should be good to go there. And even if you don't have any of that, this is not a high-level talk. So don't think like you're going to be lost in the weeds here. This is very very philosophical, but very low level in terms of common sense. So you'll be just fine. In fact, you'll probably say, I'm telling you these principles, and you'll probably tell me, Brent, why are you telling me these things? I already know this. Why did I pay $25 to come listen to you tell me things that I already know? Well, you probably do know these things. You probably are practicing these things without even knowing that you're doing them. But what I want to share with you today is why those things are important and why they're important in UI UX design. You see, as many of us as designers and creatives, how many designers we have in the room? Okay, good handful. Creative people doing something in the creative industry, yeah. As designers and creatives, we get the design process completely backwards. We tend to open up Figma or a Sketch. If you're an old grandpa like me, open up Photoshop because I don't use Sketch, but you just go to town after that. You're after that masterful end result, right? You want that pixel perfect website. Well, we imitate and we copy, we steal other people's designs. We just want it to look perfect. And some of that is okay and fine. I mean, I do it too. But, and they say the bad artists imitate, the great ones steal, right? But what I want to tell you is don't limit your stealing to the end results. You gotta figure out the why. You gotta start with why. Why do people need the product that you're trying to sell? Why does a user go to your website in the first place? Why are people unsatisfied while using your WordPress site? And once you can answer those questions, you can start asking questions like, how will people use this product? How does the user navigate my website? How are people going to be satisfied with my WordPress website? And once you can answer those questions, then and only then you can start giving definition to the what. What's the product going to look like? What navigation items are there going to be? What colors and fonts will I use? What plugins and themes am I going to use? See, those are the fun questions to ask. Those are, getting your hands dirty in the mix. You wanna jump right in. And I think that's why we get it backwards, because those things are fun. The tools are fun. It's just like being a kid, jumping through mud puddles in the rain, right? Just so much fun, just jumping out there till it's not. Till your parents come yelling at you, boy, you better get back inside before I hose you down for the whole neighborhood to see. And you come crashing back into reality. You see, like, it's never just about it being fun. It's about the why. You see, strategy is always going to be more important than tools. In problem solving, the tools you use, they're never as important as how you solve the problem. And you never need to accept a problem at face value. You see, you could take a hammer and drive in a nail, or you could take a rock and drive in a nail. Both will get the job done. But the real thing you're trying to solve what's most important is how you solve the problem. I like to ask these questions when I'm trying to solve a problem for our clients. Is this the main problem we're trying to solve? Is there another problem behind the problem that we don't even know about? Is this even the right problem to solve? And what other problems could we solve that would bring even more value to our customers? I'll give you another example. So say you break down, you go to your favorite guilty pleasure, you go to McDonald's, and you order a Big Mac, get a side of fries, get a jumbo size, because YOLO, and not even 30 minutes after you cram every last French fry in your mouth, your stomach starts hurting. Like you're in seething pain, and it's just real bad. 10 out of 10 pain scale bad, right? Everything on your insides wants to become your outsides. You start reaching for some medication, right? Take some pills. That's what you do. And after 15 minutes, you start to feel better. So you think, great, problem solved. No, problem masked, problem patched, not problem solved. You see, medication fixes symptoms, not causes. Since only the symptoms were fixed, the root cause of the problem was never even diagnosed. Didn't even think about the root cause. Thus, it still existed. Problem's still there. So quite similarly, clients have no idea what they want, right? They have no idea what they need. I'm a designer and developer, and I have no idea what I need sometimes, or what to give them. So, I mean, how can I even expect the client to know exactly what font or what colors to put on their website? You can't take their word for it. You can't just ask them and think, okay, I trust you. You can't. You gotta figure out the why. It's in that order. Why is the core? It's the motive, the purpose behind it all. And then comes the how, the process. How do we get there? And then comes the what. That's the product. That's the fun thing. It's only when we understand the why that we can determine the how, and the how is what gives definition and gives birth to the what. And that's why I say all of that to say these 10 principles that I'm about to tell you about are much more than just common sense. They're much more than just, oh, I already knew that. They matter because they're at the core of why people do what they do, why people think, and why people act, why people love you, and why people hate you. Applying these 10 principles will change the way people feel about your product when they're using it, your website, and how people feel about you. That's at the core of UI UX design. First one is Jacob's Law. Jacob Nielsen is a computer scientist, also a web usability advocate, and he coined the term Jacob's Law. He made his own law. It's kind of bold and daring, right? I want to have Brent's Law. All clients must clear their caches before submitting a support ticket. You see, Jacob's Law says users spend most of their time on other sites. This means that users prefer your site to work the same way as all those sites they already know. Make sense? And this law isn't even a future trend as it is, it's been ruling the web for decades. It's been happening since the dawn of the internet era. Think of the term shopping cart. Think of the cart icon that's associated with that. You see that everywhere. Think of blue text links. When the internet first started, every text was blue on the internet. I'm glad we got away from that trend because that was not necessarily a pattern that we need to keep, but it was a pattern. So your website's going to perform better if you use familiar design patterns. So here's 3 practical things you can do. You can place navigation at the top of the page. Your utility links, such as cart, your account, your profile, all those settings that a user has to interact with, placing those always in the top right, because that's where they commonly are. Or using 3 lines, the hamburger icon, using that for a flyout menu and not just a star or some weird looking figure because people don't know what it is. You see, many times as designers, we want to have something crazy and different and never before seen. But, and that's sometimes fine, but you got to think about your audience before doing that because the patterns that they're familiar with are how they're going to expect your website to have as well. Next one's the von Restorff effect. A lot of these are hard to say because some of these, most of these people are from all over the world. This one particularly is the German psychiatrist Hedwig von Restorff. And she did experiments and found that when participants were presented with a list of items and made one item more distinctive than the rest, the memory for that one item was improved. So, also known as the isolation effect, when multiple similar objects are present, the one that differs the most will be remembered. This is the main reason we make calls to action different than the rest of the buttons on the site. It's a different color, right? So making important and key actions visually distinctive will not only help your users remember them, but even notice them in the first place. It'll also prime them. That's a psychology term for you. And so priming is what happens when when the implicit memory interacts with the external stimulus. In our case, a visual stimulus, a button or icon or a link. So you see the visual stimulus and it triggers your brain to interact with it. So you see, people are lazy. They will go down the path of the least resistance. And you got to use that to your advantage. Why not make the most desired outcome the most different, the most simplest path to go down? Speaking of memory, the serial position effect is a good one. It was coined by Hermann Ebbinghaus, and describes how the position of an item in a list can also affect recall accuracy. It says that users have the propensity to best remember the first and last items in a series. So that means we need to place the most important information at the very top and also the most important information at the very bottom. The least important would go in the middle. So this is why in public speaking courses, people learn to nail the very first 30 seconds and the last 30 seconds. The rest in the middle it could be terrible. And as long as those first 30 seconds and those last 30 seconds are stellar, that's what you'll remember. That said, we're like 15 minutes in, so you'll probably forget everything I just said. So the same goes for design. It's important that you start well and finish well. Your homepage is good, and that last call to action page that your users are landing on is great. Focus most of the time on that. And here's an idea that you may or may not have thought of. Positioning key actions in the left and the far right of the navigation will increase their memorization and thus their performance. So a lot of times what I like to do is place like a services page or one of your most important pages at the very start. And then the contact page, which is where I want people to land the most, at the very end, first and last. If you've ever studied Gestalt Theory, you'll probably know about this one. Humans prefer things that are simple, clear, and ordered. And pragnans, I think I'm saying that correctly, it's also a German word. It means good figure. I like to think about it as just simplicity. The human eye tends to reduce the complex into simple concepts to decrease cognitive load. It states that people perceive and interpret ambiguous and complex images as the simplest form possible because it's the interpretation that requires the least cognitive effort on us. And this one's a little bit hard to understand, so I'm going to give you an example. So you ever seen those movie theater signs with the circling lights? I'll give you an example right here. A little marquee. And what do you see going on here? You see light moving around the sign. It's like it's circling around the sign, right? In reality, that's not exactly what's happening. What's happening is more complicated than that. If you break it down to the mechanical parts, the lights are turning off and then back on. And the light next to it, back off and back on. The light next to it, back off and on. And over again. But your brain just sees light moving. If we had to think about every single on and off in that sign, our brains would probably explode. You know, there's just too much mechanical information to process in our short-term memory. Brains like shortcuts. So how does that apply to UI, UX design? Well, knowing that people prefer simple, clear, and ordered information, we can reduce complexity in a number of ways. So take a complicated checkout system. Instead of having 57 fields in a checkout system on one page, you know, obviously you want to break that up into multiple pages, multiple steps. That way you don't overwhelm the user, them looking at all these fields to fill out. Also reducing navigational items. I think Taylor was talking about that before. She got a good question about using sub menus in their drop-downs. So instead of having a drop-down menu with 5 menus and 5 sub-menus, you know, just put that on another page. Put that as a sub-navigation that they can see only when they need it. You don't want to overwhelm the user. Limiting the number of items is also important because of Miller's Law. In 1956, George Miller asserted that the span of immediate memory and absolute judgment were both limited to around 7 pieces of information. It says that the average person can only keep 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2 in their working memory. This is when someone is making a decision or judgment about something. One of the most common complaints that I get when our clients are talking about their existing websites is that there's just too much going on, you know, too many options, there's too many choices. You know, our working memory is limited. And as UI, UX designers, we need to figure out a way to reduce the complexity, reduce the number of choices. When confronted with too many choices, what happens is what psychologists call decision paralysis. And that just means that no decisions actually being made. They're overwhelmed by so many choices that they're just going to give up. And by doing that, they are making a decision. They're leaving. They're going somewhere else. So it's important that we minimize the choices that users must take at any given moment, especially in places, things like navigation, forms, drop-downs, all reducing that cognitive load. This next one's fun to say, the Zeigarnik Effects. Zeigarnik was a Soviet psychologist in the 1920s, and she conducted a study on memory in relation to task completion. She concluded that tasks were easier to remember, that incomplete tasks were easier to remember than completed ones. Have you ever been trying to purchase something online and you put all the items in your cart, you fill out all your billing info, your shipping info, your credit card, your shoe size, I don't know, like they ask you all the crazy things on these checkout forms. And you probably spend about 5 minutes doing that. And then you go to hit the place order button and everything just crumbles. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna hit refresh, and I'm praying all my information's still there. I don't want to have to type that in again. You see, people remember that. People remember interrupted tasks because it's frustrating. People like to see things in their full completeness. It's also the same reason that those pesky little red badges on your iPhone screen, you know, the one on your email box that says 17,483 unread emails. Yeah. The reason that badge exists is because of Zeigarnik. People don't like things incomplete, so that primes you to complete that task. So one practice I like to do is, for multi-step processes, put a progress bar up there, you know? For a multi-page checkout process, put every single step of the process at the very top of the page and where the user is at in that process. And they see that, oh, I'm about 75% done, I have 25% more to do, I can get this done. Whereas if there was 75 fields on the page and I had no idea where the end was, I may just give up. So why not just take that to your advantage? Here's one we all know, the Pareto Principle. Anybody heard of it? Okay, got one. How about 80-20 rule? Anybody heard of that? Yeah, so most people know this as the 80-20 rule. It's Pareto. For many events, 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So Pareto was an Italian economist who noticed 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population. And this happens a lot in the world. They say the richest 20% own about 83% of the world's income. They say that 20% of patients use 80% of the healthcare resources. In 2002, Microsoft reported that 80% of the errors of Windows crashes resulted from 20% of the bugs detected. It's a bit uncanny how the world works. It's kind of scary how it's a little, it just always happens that way. And when designing, you got to think about it that way too. You got to use the majority of your time working on what's going to bring the most benefit to the most users. All the nuances and edge cases, those are less important, so don't spend as much time on those. For example, instead of spending 17 hours tweaking that one little gallery on an inside page that only 10% of your audience is going to use that time to make sure that the page header on every single page is exactly the way it needs to be. Or use that time to make sure your CTAs are clear, your calls to actions are clear. And also, if 1% of your audience only uses Internet Explorer, don't spend your time trying to make it look identical in Internet Explorer to Google Chrome. You know, it's okay for those things to look different, especially if only 1% of your audience is using Internet Explorer. The return is just not worth it. Speaking of time, the Doherty Threshold waits on no one. There's a threshold of time that the brain can wait without it actually feeling like it's waiting. 400 milliseconds. So productivity soars when a computer and its users interact at a pace that ensures that neither has to wait on the other. So in order to keep the user's attention, you must provide system feedback within at least half a second. So this isn't as much talking about page load time, although that is connected. It's more so connected to how users expect feedback when interacting with the system. So, for example, if we were to flip the light switches off in this room, right there. So we expect that light switch to work immediately. And if we don't, then our brain just gets diverted. What's going on? Why didn't that work? Same is true on the web. If someone's interacting with a website or a form and they hit the submit button, they expect a message to pop up, some type of loading message that's saying, okay, this is working, this is being submitted, this is being validated. If an error message comes up, You want to see that error message within half a second. You don't want to have to let that user wait, like, I don't know if this is working or not. I mean, how many times have you guys been on the web, I don't know if this is working or not? It's the Doherty threshold. What happens when the Doherty threshold is not met is frustration, anger, abandoned carts, unmet conversions. Ultimately, unhappy customers that are going to go somewhere else and give the money that they were going to give you to someone else. Remember Miller's Law? We can only remember set of items of information. So this one's similar, but in relation to time. It's Hicks Law. The time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. You know, you're costing your users valuable time the more choices you offer them. It's decision paralysis again. Same thing, just different law. So instead, simplify the number of choices, eliminate what you can. You know, if it's unnecessary, just take it away. Use chunking or breaking large lists into smaller lists, and that way you don't overwhelm the user in that way. And highlight recommended options. If you want the user to take a recommended option, highlight that in a different color. Especially, this works well if two buttons are beside each other. And on like a hero screen, you see two buttons, make one a different color. That way, okay, the user has a little bit more of a recommendation to do one and not the other. John Pasto. He was one of the early pioneers of the internet. And his law says, be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send. So this law was primarily a design guideline in software, specifically for regards of transfer of data across the internet, or across computer networks, I should say. It's also known as the Robustness Principle. And what Pasto was saying was that when a computer program receives input from a user, it should accept any wide array range of input, no matter what it is. But when the program sends information back, that information should be as specific as possible. And why is that important? It's important because of the way the brain receives feedback. The mind is bound to what I see is all there is. So if the feedback that the brain receives, if it's clear, or if it's not clear, if it's not accurate, then the brain will get confused. This is absolutely applicable to UI design. You must be tolerant in any number of choices a user can possibly take. So this is important when testing a website or testing an application. When I run tests, I try to think of the weirdest, most ridiculous ways to break what I just developed. I mean, this means accepting variable input from users, especially like in forms, and translating that input into what you need. So instead of making a phone number a required, you have to put the parentheses in there, you have to put the 2 dashes in there exactly right, or it's not going to work. Instead of requiring all that exactly, just require any 10 set of numbers. And then the computer can format that, or manipulate that into what the computer needs. And in giving feedback, make that feedback as specific as possible. Be conservative with what you're letting the user know. If for form validation, instead of sending there's an error or username or password was invalid, be more specific. Was it the username or was it the password? Was it the email address? If you're specific, then the brain can know, okay, I know how to fix this. If you're not, you got the brain thinking again, and you know what happens when that happens. So having both sides of this law met will result in a website that functions much like a well-tuned machine, one that's firing on all cylinders and requires light and easy maintenance. Yep. So I was hoping to keep this around 30 minutes, and we did that, so I have a bonus one. We have just enough time for Parkinson's law, which is a good one to end with. It states that any task, or WordCamp talk, will inflate to when all the available time is spent. I like that one. But in all seriousness, I hope learning these principles has given some insight on why people make the decisions they do. And as you can see, cognitive psychology, or cognitive load rather, has some of the biggest impact on the decisions we make on the internet. And the one commonality that all these principles have in common is, it can be summed up in one word: simplicity. We must do what we can to eliminate, reduce, and break down the complex into the simple. We must leverage common design patterns and not aim for the weird, the unusual, and the never-before-seen tactics. Applying these principles will change the way people feel about your product, and will change the way people feel about you. Hopefully, for the best. Thanks. And lastly, if this talk wasn't enough and you want even more, feel free to check me out on Twitter, even GitHub, on the web, bfa.me. You can also check me out on Instagram. I occasionally post there. Big thanks to my boy John Yablonsky at lawsofux.com. That's where I got most of these principles. And there's even 8 more on that website that I didn't even discuss here. I think there's 19 on that website total. Lots of good stuff, lots of good UX goodness. So definitely check that out. A little more about myself if you're interested. Those that don't know me, I make the internets at Ingenious. A couple of my coworkers there. I know Taylor, she gave a talk earlier in here at 1 o'clock, so I work with her. At Ingenious, we aim to demystify digital marketing so you don't have to. And we have a lot of fun designing, developing websites, and solving problems for our client. And I really mean, I work with some of the best people in the world. They really try to solve problems, the root cause behind problems, and not just mask the situation. And so that's a little bit about me. When I'm not on the internet or making the internet better, I usually enjoy brewery hopping and trying bourbons. And if you guys ever want to chat about any of this over a brew, or I'll buy you a beer afterwards if you want to come chat. So, and if you guys can all clear your caches before the end of the day, that will make my job a lot better. So, I think we have some time for some questions if you guys have any. And if not, that's okay too. Yeah, Elsa.
How do you see innovation and that kind of thing fitting in with the idea of using patterns that people recognize? That's a deep question.
Say it one more time.
Where do you see innovation tying in with this same idea of using patterns that people recognize so that we're not all just doing the exact same thing?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely a line you have to balance. Yeah. And the question there for the camera is, how does innovation pair with making sure you follow common design patterns? There's definitely a fine line there, and you have to balance it. Obviously, you want to be creative. As a designer, you want to make something that looks good. You want to make something that's just not the same website that you guys have you've seen. But I think where the creativity comes in is more so the details of how it looks and not so much how it works. When you're looking at the functionality, I think that's when the design pattern is more important. Things like the flyout menus, the drop-down menus. That's all dealing with functionality. But you can make it look as pretty as you want. And there's also one called the aesthetic usability effect. That's another law. It states that people perceive aesthetic design or prettier design as something that's more usable. So, don't forget about that. Don't forget about making things look good. And, things can be both usable and also beautiful. So, any other questions? All right, thank you.